There's a couple big mistakes here that a lot of creators are making. You would absolutely know the names of some of these creators that have signed away incredibly important things very early on in their career that you can never take back. I actually saw firsthand one of our creators ended up losing about $50,000 as a result of making this mistake.
The most important thing that you can do, and the biggest mistake that we say, is
So we started Creators Agency with the mission of helping creators get paid what they're worth through delivering consistent, high-quality brand deals in a completely transparent and non-exclusive manner. Since then, we facilitated thousands of brand partnerships and helped our creators make tens of millions of dollars. We're on a mission to help creators make $1 billion, and this podcast is our way of documenting the journey and sharing the lessons that we learn along the way.
In today's episode, we're going to be diving into the common mistakes creators make in dealing with brands and how you can avoid them so you can build a sustainable, long-term, and lucrative career. We talked about in the last episode how brand partnerships can account for more than half of your total revenue if you are big, if you're a successful creator from that perspective. So we want to break down each stage from initial contact to negotiation to the contract phase to ultimately execution, and how you can deal with that, how you can deal with those processes at ease so that you don't have to make the mistakes that we've learned from. So let's start with the initial contact of when a brand either reaches out to you or you decide to take the plunge and reach out to a brand that you really, really want to work with. How do you go about doing that? How do you respond to a brand message or from a company saying that they're interested in working with you? How do you make sure that you properly negotiate yourself and put yourself in the best light so that you don't make those same mistakes? Let's dive into that part of the whole process right now, and then we'll take it from there.
So the first big mistake that creators make at this initial stage of the process is just waiting for brands to come to them. If you're just sitting around checking your emails and waiting for brands to just slide into your DMs, that's going to be a pretty substantial mistake because you're limiting yourself in a very meaningful way. There are so many great brands out there that you could be working with, and sometimes they slide right into your emails and they make it super easy for you. But a lot of times they don't. And that doesn't mean just because you're not getting an email from a brand that they're not interested in working with you. It just means that they didn't find your channel, decide to reach out and follow through with actually doing that. As a creator, you see what brands are working with other creators. You know what brands you're interested in working with. And it's honestly not that difficult to reach out to them. It's really never been easier to find information from different companies that you want to work with in terms of, who's the point person there that you should be talking to? How do you get in touch with that person? How do you strike up a conversation? The internet makes it super easy to get in touch with the right people at these companies and get those conversations started such that you don't have to wait around for them to reach out to you.
Something that's really smart to do is you take your landscape of creators, your competitors, if you will, and really map down, write down or jot down which brands are currently in the market within the influencer in the creator marketing space and which ones are actually spending money on influencers. This gives you a good universe of brands to ultimately deal with that you can then think about, hey, if they've spent their money, if they've spent their marketing dollars on X creator, then why shouldn't they also be able to deal with me? It gives you a universe of brands that you can reach out to that do have interest in creators. And it also gives you a good starting point to reach out to and find the contacts within those brands as to who might be able to structure some kind of deal for you.
Yeah, it's so important to be intentional with who do you want to reach out to. And that's a great way to source potential brands. That's something that we're doing internally all of the time. We've got our list of creators that we're constantly monitoring, seeing which brands they're working with and keeping on top of just the landscape as a whole, right? Like who's spending money right now? Who's got a big Q4 initiative coming up that we should make sure that we're tapping into? What brands are, putting their foot on the gas? What brands are taking their foot off the gas? And really just who is generally spending money, right? Because all of this stuff really ebbs and flows. And so that's a great way to start establishing your list of potential brands to work with. On top of that, I would say it's really important to just think about who are the brands that would naturally fit well with your content. Of course, there's going to be all of these brands that are always spending. But when it comes to your content in particular and your audience and what you already do, who are those brands that you're engaging with on an everyday basis? And even if they're not the same ones that you see spending money all the time, that doesn't mean that there's no reason to reach out to them, right? There have been plenty of instances where we've reached out to brands that don't actively spend on social. Maybe they've never worked with a creator before, but because we have an idea that is just the perfect fit for them, because we have the right creator who's making the right kind of content, those kind of partnerships can often be the ones that just lead into really successful long-term engagements because there is such a natural alignment there.
So say you've narrowed down your search to a couple different brands that you really want to work for. We think you could be of value from that. Who are the right people to contact, and where do you go about finding their contact information so that you can provide a pitch to them for why your channel or why your profile would be best fit for? What are some brand titles that you should be looking at on LinkedIn? How do you reach out to them, Apple? Like what are some ways that we could start sourcing more specific contacts for you to start sourcing these deals and putting these deals together for yourself?
That's a great question. Let's get actionable. So typically, I like LinkedIn. It depends on the particular brand and how you want to engage with them, right? Sometimes Instagram DMs can be a great way to just get your foot in the door and at least get the right person's contact to chat with, because a lot of these brands that are actively spending on social are monitoring their Instagram DMs, especially for DMs from folks that are content creators. That's always an avenue. Personally, I see a lot more success with LinkedIn and going down that route, because then you can kind of do the legwork of figuring out who is the right person to talk to, right? Generally, what we find is it really depends on the size of company, right? If you're talking to a 10-person company, the job title of the person you're going to want to speak with is very different than if you're talking to a 10,000-person company. That's kind of the context that we're going into it with, right? So if it's a 10-person company, you're probably looking for somebody like the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, or maybe there's a head of growth that you could be speaking with. But you're going to be looking for somebody who's in a relatively senior role, because a 10-person company isn't going to have an influencer marketing department. They're not going to have very many departments at all, right? They're going to have a marketing department, but further down than that, probably nothing. Taking things to a slightly larger scale, if you're talking to a, say, 100-person company, then there may be an influencer person, depending on if it is one of these brands that you're seeing spending with tons of different creators. They might have somebody like an influencer marketing manager. The risk that you run into kind of as companies get bigger is that you might be reaching out to somebody too senior. This is especially true if you're a smaller creator, right? Because once you get to a company like, say, Adobe, for example, right? If you're talking to the head of growth at Adobe, this is a person who's making multi-million-dollar decisions, not somebody who's going to be able to allocate, $10,000 to a brand partnership.
And this all comes down to doing your homework. A brand or a company, no matter the size, they love seeing somebody that's proactive, but even better, somebody who knows, who knows what they're talking about and the homework that they've done on their company, say, and how they could potentially add value to that. So thinking about, at the moment, if you notice that a company that you'd want to work with is a big size company and they don't do too much in influencer marketing, that could be a pretty interesting opportunity to go into. Or like we said before, from your research and from the universe of a company that are spending, you can pitch yourself in a vastly different way. Say, hey, look, I know that you've pitched, I know that you've done deals with X and Y creator. I think I can add value to that because of these reasons from that perspective as well. But it all comes down to understanding the brand, understanding their values and how you can fit in there, while at the same time doing your homework and understanding how the company is structured and how you can, again, like how you can navigate that so that immediately you can add value to them and makes that decision for them to go ahead or not that much quicker and that much easier.
Like if you can come in and say, hey, I saw that you did this YouTube short with Shelby Church and this 6-second integration with Jack Gordon. And based on kind of the content we're looking at there, here's my idea for how I could, build on top of this, bring my own unique angle here and do something really exciting, right? Like that kind of message is really going to stand out to somebody at this company because they're like, oh, this isn't just some random person who saw that I have money to spend and wants a cut of it. Like this is somebody who's really putting in the legwork to understand what I care about. And this is a recurring theme that we're going to keep coming back to, but it's like, you really want to focus on what the person you're talking to cares about. Because obviously, there are the things that you care about and those are great and those are very important. But if you want somebody's ears to perk up and them to like really listen to you, you have to focus on what gets them excited. What are they waking up every day thinking about? What are they going to work focused on, right? And so the more that you can appeal to those things and show them that you're really in their corner to help them succeed, the more success you're going to have. And a great way to do that is doing your homework, looking at some examples of past content that they've done and figuring out, how can you bring your own unique angle to what they're already doing and already seeing success from.
So now that you've decided that you have a brand that you're interested in, you've figured out who to reach out to, what should you say? What's the narrative that you want to pitch about yourself? How do you put together the best package to really showcase what you're about in the best light possible?
How can you give something to a brand that they're actually going to read through, and that is going to convey as much information as possible, right? Because if you send a brand a 10-page Google Doc of all of the amazing things that you've done, unfortunately, no one's probably going to read that. Like, you have to find a balance between, sending them everything and sending them, what's really going to pique their interest. And so a media kit can be a great way to do this, right? And a media kit can mean a whole bunch of different things. A media kit could be a 1-page PDF with some key stats from your channel on it. It could also be, a 30-page slide deck with a lot more in-depth information, video clips, past brand partnerships, so many different things. But this is kind of the standard way that brands are used to receiving this kind of information, right? They want a quick and digestible way that they can figure out who you are and what you're about. And this makes their life a lot easier too, because thinking about who you're speaking with at a brand, right? Say you're talking to an influencer marketing manager. Maybe that person reports to a head of growth, and the head of growth determines how much money the influencer marketing manager gets. In order for them to get money from their boss to spend on creators, they're going to have to appeal to their boss and help their boss understand why it makes sense to spend money with a certain creator. And so when you can give this person you're talking to a nice, neat little package that explains who you are, what you do, why it's a good fit for this brand, that this influencer marketing manager can just very easily take to their boss, it's going to make it so much more likely that you actually get a deal done, because you're making the person that you're talking to's life so much easier. And that's something that we're constantly thinking about. It's like, how do we make the person on the other end of this email's life easier? Because the easier we make their life, the more they're going to want to work with us, and the easier it's going to be for them to get resources to spend with us. And so media kit can be a really, really solid way to do that.
That's such a good point. Like, how do you think 2 steps ahead of what the next question is going to be, or what the next process is going to be from the company side of thing going forward? You have to appeal to what their managers, the person you're reaching out to, their managers. You don't have to convince just one person. You have to convince maybe a lineup of people thereafter as to why you should be getting that money. So what goes into a media kit that can help push through this narrative that you're trying to build for yourself and why you'd be the perfect fit? Firstly, it's important to talk about your story. What is your channel about? What are you about? What drives you and what brings you passion? And why are you doing this in the first place? What are some values that you live up to? And what are you trying to accomplish with your channel? And how does that ultimately fit into the brand values of the company that you're pitching to? It's super important, again, in the spirit of being unique and in the spirit of trying to stand out, that you personalize things as much as possible, because that also helps you be a step ahead of everybody else who's doing the same thing. The second part is the audience. What does your audience look like, both geographically, but also demographically? So where are they based? Are they primarily based in the US? What part of the US? Or is your demographic mainly male or female? Or how old are they? Are you appealing to an 18 to 25-year-old audience? Or is your audience more in the 40 to 50-year-old range? If you think also about how generally paid ads work and how marketing works, you're really appealing to a certain demographic and a geographic to find your best case or your best fit for whatever product or service that the company is selling.
When you're thinking about how these companies are allocating their marketing dollars, typically on something like Facebook ads, companies are able to get very granular with their targeting. And when working with creators, you're pretty limited in terms of the information that, say, YouTube Studio gives to you. And so it can be a really great idea to try to gather as much information about your audience as possible and display that information in your media kit so that brands can have a much more educated view on who you're actually reaching. So great way to do this is just run a survey with your audience, where you give away some Amazon gift cards or something like that, just something of value. Maybe you give away something more relevant to your actual content. But this can be a great way to incentivize your audience to tell you information about yourself. And you can just send out a quick little, 10-question survey. What's the highest level of education you have? What's your household income? These are things that typically brands can target based on in their other forms of marketing that with influencer marketing, it's very difficult for them to nail down on. And so the more information you can bring in terms of who exactly the brand is reaching, the more confidence they're going to be able to go to the rest of their team and say, hey, this guy really matches the audience that we're seeing the best ROI from with our other forms of marketing, I think it can make a ton of sense to test something out here. Another thing that we like to include in all of our media kits is kind of just a page that includes all of the brands that you have worked with, right? So not full case studies, but kind of just like logos, to increase that credibility, right? If a brand can see, oh, wow, Jack Gordon has worked with 50 other brands over the past couple of years, ranging anywhere from, super reputable companies to, more startups. Brands can kind of understand, okay, here's a couple of our of companies that we're aware of that are at a similar scale to us and that are doing similar things. That's going to give them more confidence that, in this case, Jack's the right person for them to be talking to.
Next thing you want to include in your media kit is your offerings. What channels are you currently on? What platforms are you on? Are you on YouTube, TikTok? Do you have an email list? Do you have anything else outside of the norm that could potentially be used as part of a package? The more offerings you're able to provide, they can be as creative as possible from that side too, the better, because that also gets different ideas spurring about how you could structure a deal very creatively from that side.
Absolutely. And then finally, you're going to want to include rates on here. Now, this is kind of a mixed bag. People have different opinions on including rates on a media kit. My personal stance on it, and Eric, I'd love to hear yours as well, is that I think rates make a ton of sense to include as a starting point and as kind of an anchoring point. We're going to talk about proposals and how to create effective proposals a little bit later on. But in terms of starting the conversation around rates and setting effective expectations, I think having those benchmark rates on your media kit is overall a positive thing.
I think having rates is a good thing, but I would take it one step further, and maybe this goes into more of the proposal stages, but in the spirit of trying to be unique and really stand out, instead of having rates, I would put together, a couple different packages or a couple different, specific ways that we could work together, say maybe 3 of them, and have different price points for those instead of just standard rates. So instead of saying that, a 60-second integration on YouTube costs you $5,000, and you also do have, a dedicated email list that you could, email list of say 50,000 people, that's going to cost you, I don't know, let's say another $5,000. I would put together a package and say, hey, look, for 2 YouTube integrations and 1 email, this is what it's going to cost X. If you want to instead do, say, a week-long campaign on email and maybe 1 video, I would go even more specific and highlight those type of packages, because that also showcases that you're thinking about things a little bit differently, and again, trying to provide value in ways that the brands might enjoy specifically. So that's what I would do in the spirit of trying to be more unique and specific.
So taking a step back here to inbound, and when brands reach out to you as a creator, there's a couple big mistakes here that a lot of creators are making. And this first one, I actually saw firsthand. One of our creators ended up losing about $50,000 as a result of making this mistake. So really, really impactful stuff. And that mistake is not effectively vetting the brands and agencies that reach out to you.
Yeah. So the bottom line is, the more successful, the bigger the creator, the bigger the audience that you receive, the more people or the more companies and brands are going to want to work with you. On a daily basis, for us, we receive hundreds of emails a day. And typically, typically 1 to 3% of those hundreds of emails that we receive per day would be considered quality brands or brands that might have effective proposals that we can work with from that side. And this is purely off of inbound leads that we get. And this is, I'd say this is very much, generic for other creators as well, just specifically. So it's super important to be able to have a good vetting function or vetting process to be able to identify which leads are real, which leads are genuine, and which leads are ultimately scams. Scams can be absolutely disastrous, not just for lost income, but for reputational damage in so many levels that can be really, really hurtful to you, your audience, your community, and ultimately what you're trying to build. Super, super important to have a process in place and to really extend out your due diligence. I'd say that's probably one of the biggest mistakes we see creators make, unfortunately, more often than we'd like to say.
I've got this vivid memory in my mind of one of our creators, happened about a year ago. They text me and they say, hey, Apple, I'm worried I might have just gotten scammed on my last 3 partnerships. And immediately my heart dropped. I remember I was like walking through the airport. I saw this text and I was like, oh no. So I called them up, we talked through it, but long story short, they ended up losing about $50,000 to $60,000 in brand deal revenue because because they got scammed. And here's kind of how the scam played out. And this can kind of help you to understand, how do you avoid something like this in the future? So this creator got reached out to by a quote unquote agency. And that agency was offering them a brand deal from a reputable company, one that I'm sure you've seen sponsor dozens, if not hundreds of creators on the platform. And the rate that they were offered was comparable, if not a little bit better than the rates that they were normally getting on their brand deals. And so on the surface, looked great. And the creator was like, okay, awesome, sign me up. Like, I would love to work with this brand. This is a great rate. Let's do it. So they do the sponsorship, they record the ad, they get it approved, the video goes live. And meanwhile, this agency reaches out with another deal from another great brand at another solid rate. And this one was for 2 videos. And so they go ahead and they film those 2 videos and everything's going great. Another offer comes in, another great brand. They start working on that video. And by this point, the payment for the first video is coming due. And so creators going to this agency and they're checking in. They're like, hey, looks like we're due to get paid from this brand. What's kind of the latest? And they don't hear anything for a couple of days. Turns into about a week. And the creator starts to get pretty concerned because at this point, they're starting to question the legitimacy of this entire agency. They haven't heard back from them in about a week. They're hearing back on these other threads about these other brand deals that the agency's trying to move forward. But when it comes to payments, they're just getting completely ghosted. After another couple of days, that's when the creator reached out to me and was starting to get concerned about not being able to get paid. And so I worked with them on this. I gave them some action steps to take, questions to ask this other agency. And it turned out that it was completely fraudulent. And so what had happened was this agency had gone to these reputable brands, right? Because the deals actually happened and the creator was sent product from these brands. But what had happened on the back end was this agency had gone to big brand that you've seen before and said, hey, big brand, I can get you a sponsorship deal on this creator's channel for $2,000. And the brand was like, oh, that's a no-brainer because this creator's rate was normally about 5 to 10x that. And so the brand was like, oh, absolutely, sign us up. Here's the money. And then the agency goes to the creator and they're like, hey, creator, we got this great deal with this brand for $20,000. And so the creator was like, oh, awesome. That's better than what I normally get paid. But the thing is, the creator never got paid. And that agency, the scammers really pocketed the $2,000 and did that for about 3 ads before the creator caught on. I'm sure at the same time they were doing this with plenty of other creators. And it just turned into an absolutely terrible situation where this creator ended up posting 3 videos with sponsors that they never got paid for because the agency, the scammer in the middle just took all the money.
That's absolutely horrendous, and my blood is boiling hearing that. And I do remember that to this day as well. And I remember when you told me about it, I was absolutely shocked. But this is also a big part of the reason, unfortunately, why agencies get such a bad reputation in this space, and why we have also implemented and make sure that for every company, every brand that we work with for the very first time, we make sure that we have a 50% upfront fee to make sure that there are, in case something does go wrong, and in case we haven't been able to properly work with them in the past, we haven't been able to build, a historical record with them and how they work and the processes they have, that we have at least collected half the amount early on. For any companies that are any brands that flat out deny that, we'll have a complete red line and we will not work with them in the past. And this is something we tell all our creators that we work with to do as well. If you haven't worked with the brand, if you haven't worked with an agency before in the past, make sure you get paid at least half up front to make sure that you collect on some of the money. Because again, this is about finding long-term partners that you can trust and that you can verify from that. So that's the most important part, a most important piece of advice that we can give as to how to avoid this problem.
We see emails come through every day that say, oh, this is from, Sprite, or this is from a big brand that probably isn't spending on creators in the kind of way that this email is supposing that they are. You look at the domain that email is coming from, and it'll just be something completely random. It'll either be from, a Gmail address, which, Sprite, Coca-Cola, like they're not going to be reaching out from a Gmail, or it's going to be from a random domain from typically some other country. And what you're looking at there is just a scammer, right? And so the scams tend to vary in terms of, what they're proposing and what they're saying. But at the end of the day, their objective is to get money at your expense. And so looking at the domain name that the email is coming from is incredibly important. Go to that domain, highlight the domain, copy paste it into your browser, check it out. If there's no website there, don't respond to the email. If it redirects you to some website that's like in a different language and has nothing to do with the company or the agency that's reaching out, delete it, don't respond to it. And really only if it is the actual domain of the brand or agency that claims to be reaching out, at that point, you can move on to the next stage and potentially start taking this seriously. It's extremely, extremely easy to send an email from a random domain and pretend to be somebody that you're not. And so doing that due diligence is incredibly important. Also on top of that, trying to find the person that's reaching out to you on LinkedIn, verify that they do in fact work at that company, that they are in fact a real person, is another thing that's just like, these are just table stakes of what you need to be doing before you start engaging with people that are reaching out to you. Because anyone can get your email, anyone can say anything in an email. And you really need to do your due diligence to make sure that it is, in fact, the person that they say that they are.
Any type of scam, any type of issue, anything that happens by associating your own brand with something that doesn't turn out to be what you thought it was in the beginning can be extremely, extremely detrimental to your brand. So that's one thing that I just want to really, really highlight, that due diligence, even though it may take a long time or take a lot more effort in the beginning, absolutely always pays off in the end, by making sure that you do the best job you possibly can in vetting these brands or vetting these agencies that you're planning to work with.
So now that you've got that out of the way and you're only talking to reputable, legitimate brands, something that's really important to think about, and we briefly touched on this earlier, is who are you talking to and what are their objectives? Because depending on the size of company, right? Sometimes you're talking to the CMO, the head of growth. Sometimes you're talking to an influencer marketing manager. At an even larger company, you might be talking to somebody that reports to an influencer marketing manager. It's like an influencer marketing associate or something like that. And it's really important to, from as early on as possible in the conversation, understand, who is this person? Where do they fit into the company? What are their objectives? What are their personal KPIs as well as the company's KPIs? And what is this person, going into work every day trying to get done? What are their objectives and how do they end up looking good to their boss? Because at the end of the day, right, you're talking to a person who wants to look good in front of their boss and who wants to be recognized for doing good work. And so the more that you can understand, what does good work look like to this particular person and what are they getting recognized for? What are they trying to optimize for? The better conversation you're going to be able to have as we kind of get into the proposal, the negotiation, the more educated you can be about who you're talking to and what they care about, the better the results you're going to be able to generate for everybody involved in the situation.
So let's talk about an example. So say you're speaking to somebody, the head of growth at a business, and their main objective, their main purpose for what they're trying to achieve is converting for new customer acquisitions, or converting customers to utilize their paid product. That campaign and that objective is going to be vastly different from, say, the CMO of a bigger company or marketing objective that's trying to utilize, you try to create a campaign for brand awareness or create a campaign that's very, very specific to, say, one of their objectives. Most recently, we've talked to a company that's really trying to build awareness for an award ceremony that they want to try to highlight different creators as change makers. That's something that'd be a vastly different campaign than somebody who's really trying to convert leads into customers. So understanding that and how you tailor that approach is super important, and will ultimately have a big, big determination in whether they choose to go with you or not.
Right. Like some of the brand reps we talk to, their objective is they have, say, $100,000 to spend every month. And their objective is to buy YouTube ads at below a $20 CPM. And as long as they can do that, they're doing great. And the conversions are irrelevant in terms of how they are personally evaluated at doing their job. And then, some people at other companies that are more direct response focused, they've got a CAC target or a customer acquisition cost target. And their boss says, here's $50,000 to spend if you can bring in new customers for less than $200 each, then next month I'll give you $75,000 to spend. And you're doing a great job. But if the customers cost more than $400, then you're going to get less money next month because that's not really doing a good job here. And so you really just need to understand, and it all just comes down to, asking questions, being a good listener, getting curious, and really just having these conversations that so many other creators just aren't even willing to have or interested in having, because they're just so focused on, how do I get a deal done as quickly as possible with as few emails as possible, as little back and forth. I just send them a number and they send me a number and then we agree on a number and then it's done. You miss so much of the bigger picture of who you're talking to, what do they care about, how can I really appeal to what matters to them? And those are the things that are really going to allow you to go from, establishing a client relationship with someone to establishing like a partnership relation with someone where you're working together to achieve common goals, rather than, them just hiring you on a one-off basis to help them check a box that their boss told them they have to check.
We always tell the team that the very first deal should always just be the starting point of something much, much larger in relationship building with that particular brand or company. The whole objective of getting one deal done is not just to get one contract done, it's to do 10 of them, do 20 of them, to showcase that you are trustworthy and you're delivering on what you say you will as well. That's the case for us as an agency, but that's also the case for the creator as well, who's doing the same thing by putting their reputation on the line to make sure that, again, you deliver on what you stand for. You deliver on what you promised. Super important in establishing long-term partnerships. And think about that as well. The more you do that, the more you deliver on your word, the more you deliver on what you say you will, the easier the future deals become, because the brand is better able to manage the deliverables they can expect from you, which makes it a lot easier to get the yes from whoever the boss is or whoever the decision maker is from that brand. So it's 100% just about building that trust and that reputation to really turning one deal into 10 at a very minimum.
Right, exactly. And because when a brand is starting to work with you for the first time, there's a lot of risk involved, right? They don't know how things are going to go. Worst case scenario, they could send you some money and you could just run away with it, right? Like that's totally a possibility. But best case scenario, it's like they engage with you, it goes really well, you over deliver, you just over communicate, you absolutely kill it for them, and then it turns into something longer term. But there's so much risk at the beginning of a new partnership for everybody, right? You don't know what it's going to be like to work with them. They don't know what it's going to be like to work with you. And so everyone is just treading a little bit lightly.
Something that we've noticed, or something that we've also learned, is that startups, which can be extremely exciting to work with, say you work with, the new hot thing, the new hot fintech business, or whatever that might be from that perspective, are oftentimes going to be much more pressurized to produce, or much more under pressure to produce results. And as a result of that, we find that, smaller startups, even though they're very exciting to work with, can often lead to maybe a little bit more risk, especially when it comes to influencer management and running campaigns from that side, because their number one objective most oftentimes is to make sure that they convert to new customers, or they may have investors that they have, setting some insane targets from that side too. But we found that generally speaking, smaller companies, startups included, are going to be much more difficult to work with oftentimes, rather than more well-established companies that may also have, a bigger budget.
There are plenty of other companies that, started off on a small scale, spent a couple $1,000s, didn't see the insane results that they were looking for. And so we'll talk about expectation setting a little bit later. Then that led them to just completely refuse paying. And so now we're stuck in this position where we're, chasing down these startups for de minimis amounts of money for our creators that are just an incredible nightmare, huge thorn in the side situation. And so it really is, a higher risk situation. There's certainly in some cases, upside to be had from taking that risk, but then in other situations, that is going to come to bite you if that company decides for whatever reason that they didn't see exactly what they wanted. And with this first stage too, something that's really important and where I see a lot of creators going wrong is not keeping momentum going in the conversations that you're having with brands. A rule of thumb that I always have is in every email that I send, I want it to be incredibly clear what next steps are for everybody. I never want that to be ambiguous, because that's how conversations fizzle out and die. I want to make it as easy as possible for the brands that I'm talking to know exactly what I need from them, and for them to know exactly what they need from me and when they're going to get it. Every piece of communication, whether it's a phone call, whether it's a email, whether it's, whatever, an Instagram DM, it's always important that everybody knows where things are going, where the momentum is going, and what needs to be done to continue carrying things forward. If a brand asks you, what's your rate? And you respond $10,000, period, send. That, that doesn't make it very easy for them to continue the conversation, right? You want to open things up, make it very clear, my rate for the deliverables outlined is $10,000. However, I'd love to learn more about, how you guys are evaluating the success of this campaign so that I can make sure that we're totally aligned in what expectations are and where we should be going. Could you share a bit more about how you guys are defining success here? That's going to be a lot more effective for you in moving the conversation forward. There's a clear question. They know what you need from them. You gave them what they needed from you. And so that's how we move things forward. And that's how we keep momentum going. If you're just responding in one-word answers, single sentences, it's kind of like pulling teeth on the brand side, right? Like they're having to pull answers out of you rather than, this being a fluid conversation where everybody's contributing and everybody's moving the ball forward.
So another factor that I want to point out along with that is the speed of the speed of the responses that you're giving to them. Chances are that the brand, if they're reaching out to you, they're probably reaching out to multiple different creators as well. So speed is really of the essence to make sure that you're top of mind always. If you wait a couple days, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, you may be quickly forgotten about. And the campaign may have already started, that process of going through with the campaign from the brands may have already started and gotten kicked off because they want to work at a much, much faster pace than you're responding to emails or any kind of or messages from that side. So speed and responses and keeping the fluidity of that conversation, and to Apple's point, always keeping the ball on their side so that they have to respond back to you, I'd say are extremely important angles of getting any deal done.
And that takes us straight into the next stage of the process, which is the discovery stage. So this is where you are collecting information about the brand, learning more about them and their objectives. And at the same time, they're learning more about you. They're learning about your rates. They're learning about your deliverables. We're putting together, some initial ideas of what's going to be interesting to them. For us, this typically happens, between a mix of emails and typically a phone call or two. But in this stage of the process, one of the first big mistakes that we see creators making is not being in the driver's seat. And what I mean by this is not intentionally taking control of the conversation. It can be really easy when you're getting outreach from a bunch of different brands, right? And you've got so many brand conversations going, you're just rolling in opportunities that you just shoot off responses. Maybe you're quick with it and you get back to people, but you're kind of just going along with whatever they say. They say, what's your rate for a dedicated YouTube video? And you say, here's my rate for a dedicated YouTube video. And then you wait for them to get back to you. And then they're kind of the ones in the driver's seat. When you can assume that role and go into these conversations with a clear understanding, or at least a general idea of where you want things to go, right? What is your ideal outcome? That allows you to be a lot more proactive in guiding the conversation in the intended direction. And that doesn't just mean, with every conversation, you just want to drive brands to the same package and your objective is just to get them to say yes to that package. Typically for us, being in the driver's seat means how do we collect as much information about the person we're talking to, the company that they work for, what their objectives are, what they've done in the past, all of those things as possible so that we can drive the conversation towards something that's going to be as exciting for them as possible. When you can really just take the time before you dive into things to just think through, okay, in a best case scenario, where does this lead? And then guide the conversation in that general direction. That is going to bring you so much more success than just kind of going into it, shooting from the hip and not really having a plan on where you want things to go.
Another mistake that we see, we've talked about this earlier as well, but creators not being curious enough about what the brand has already done. Asking questions, really understanding what their purpose is. What are they trying to achieve? What is this particular campaign? What is a metric or success metric look like for them? How do we make sure that the momentum of the conversation doesn't die? It's by asking more and more questions and waiting for them to give you responses. An easy way also of showcasing, of really showcasing that, hey, that you aren't really showing too much effort is by having an outdated media kit. If you're sending a media kit to a brand and the media kit is outdated by, say, a couple months, you know that they're going to know that you've sent this out. This is probably a standard message that you send out to every single brand, and therefore there isn't really too much credibility behind your pitch.
You can ask them for specific feedback on, hey, I see you did this partnership with Jake Carlini. How did that end up performing for you? Or I see that you did some, newsletter sponsorships with Caleb Hammer. How did those perform for you? And again, this goes to show that you're doing your homework and also gives you the information you need to better position yourself and think about, what can you propose to them that is going to be the most interesting, relevant, and not something that they have already tried before.
So let's move on to the proposal stage. So what should creators really be thinking about as they go through putting together proposals after you've done the diligence, after you have a good sense of what the brand is looking for? Well, what should creators be thinking about?
Well, there's two big mistakes that I tend to see creators make in the proposal stage. The first of which is sending out a proposal before you really have enough information from a brand to send out a great proposal. If you just jump the gun, the brand asks you for your rate for a 6-second integration, you have no idea why they want a 6-second integration, you have no idea what they want to see out of that 6-second integration, you have no idea what their expectations are. It's way too early to just shoot off a proposal and see what happens. Sure, you can do that, and sure, sometimes they'll say yes, but far, far more often than not, that's not going to translate into something long-term. What is going to translate into something long-term is asking a lot of questions, getting very curious up front, and gathering sufficient information to put together a proposal that is going to make the brand feel like, wow, this person really gets it. They really understand what I'm going for, what I'm optimizing for, and what results I'm looking to achieve. When you send a proposal and get that kind of response from a brand, so much more likely you're going to be able to do something of substance there, because most creators just don't do that. They just have their standard packages they send, they have their standard rates that they send, and they don't bother to do anything above and beyond that because they're just like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and I'll just try again with the next brand that comes through. So really, you want to make sure that you're gathering enough information such that you fully understand the company that you're talking to. And if there are any unanswered questions, say you're putting together a proposal and you're like, well, I don't really know if that's the right thing to do here. That's a perfect indicator that you need to ask more questions and you need to get clear on all of these things. If you're writing a proposal and anything is unclear, I would say ask about it. Ask about it before you send things off. Brands are going to really respect this. If it's a brand that's worth working with, they're going to acknowledge this. They're going to say, wow, this creator actually cares. Unlike the, dozens of other creators that we're talking to, this one actually cares about us. They actually care what kind of results they're going to drive because, odds that they just reached out to you, extremely low, right? If a brand's talking to you, they're probably talking to dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of other creators. And so the more things you can do to set yourself apart, show them that you actually care about their success, the better off you're going to be. And then the other thing that I'll say about proposals is that it's so important to take into account the brand's objective when you're thinking through what deliverables you actually want to include. Just because a brand reaches out and asks you for a 60-second integration rate doesn't mean that all you can present to them is a 60-second integration. When a brand reaches out to one of our creators and asks that, the first thing that I'm going to ask them is like, what are your objectives here? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Because maybe in their world, a 60-second integration is all that exists. And so maybe I just need to be the person that introduces them to all of the other options that are out there, from doing organic mentions to doing a dedicated video or a semi-dedicated video or a newsletter or a podcast mention or an Instagram reel. Like maybe they just don't know what else is out there because they haven't been exposed to it. They did one YouTube integration and it worked. And so that's all they know. It's like, let's take a more strategic and intentional approach in helping them achieve their goals, because you know your audience best. You might know my Instagram audience is so engaged, and anytime I put something in front of them, they go crazy for it. And so you know that the brand doesn't, right? And so they think YouTube integration is best. Anything on Instagram is going to absolutely crush. So maybe it makes sense to, hey, let's start off, let's do the YouTube thing that you guys want to do. And then let's also just bundle in, we'll do an Instagram reel and an Instagram story. We'll have separate tracking for both of those initiatives. And then we'll be able to come back, compare the results so that the brand can empirically see, what you anecdotally know to be true, right? Instagram's converting better, but the brand wants to try both. So you create that opportunity, you help educate them, and you help to guide them in the right direction.
So now that we've done that, now we've sent in a proper proposal, let's go on to the negotiation. The biggest mistake that we see creators make is not having a plan while going into negotiation. So what does that mean? If you gave a proposal, say with 3 different options, what are you really ideally looking to achieve? Maybe you gave one proposal just to set a price anchor. Maybe you provided another proposal that was extremely expensive, but kind of the far-reaching proposal that maybe they say yes to, maybe they don't. But the sweet spot, or maybe the middle one, is really what you're looking to achieve and trying to, come out of that. But having a plan in place for how you go about strategically putting together these proposals, and then thereafter going into negotiation with what a successful outcome looks for you, is super, super important. And we just don't see that enough with creators.
So many people just shoot off a number, the brand shoots them something back, and then they just land somewhere in the middle and they're like, okay, that's fine, I'll do that. And then they just move on to the next one. And you're just leaving so much potential on the table there when you're not going in with an ideal outcome, right? And this is the same thing we were talking about earlier, right? If you don't go in with an objective, with a clear, like, here's in an ideal world where I want things to go, and you can be in the driver's seat and you can take things to where you want them, that's where you're going to see the most upside. That's where you're going to be able to build the most substantial relationships. If you're just flying by the seat of your pants, don't really care, you're like, yeah, well, I normally make about, $8,000 a sponsorship. So as long as I'm, somewhere between 6 and 10, I feel good. That's not really going to allow you to really fully capitalize on the opportunities in front of you. And so really, with any negotiation that we're going into, we know where we want to go. We know where we want to land. And so, to Eric's point, we're being incredibly strategic about that with the packages that we present, how we mention things, how we structure things, how we present different things. All of that is very intentionally done to guide us where we want to go, rather than just, oh, let's just throw this out there and see what happens, right? That doesn't really do you the best service as a creator.
I mean, that goes into the next point, the next mistake that we see, and that's really just letting short-term thinking, overpower the long-term negotiation strategy that you might have. I mean, talk to us a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah. So coming back to that example earlier, right? Say a brand reaches out, they want to give you 20 grand and they're expecting 10,000 clicks, and in a best case scenario, you deliver 2,000. Could be really tempting for you to just be like, oh, well, I'm never going to deliver that, but they want to give me 20 grand. So let me just take the 20 grand and do it. That's letting short-term thinking guide your decision-making, right? Because instead of taking the time to educate the brand, really get curious about why that's what they're looking for and how they normally get there. And really what we like to do at that point is to take a step back and say, hey, I want to be totally transparent. Typically, we're only driving about 1,000 to 2,000 clicks on our links. Where's that benchmark coming from, right? Like is that 10,000 clicks from working with another creator? Is that from running Facebook ads, running Google ads? Is that just kind of like a ballpark shot in the dark number that a colleague of theirs told them to aim for? If they're expecting something and you're not going to deliver it, it's a waste of time, right? It's a waste of time for you to do that because it's not going to lead anywhere. And so in those situations, it can be really difficult to take a step back and, instead of just grabbing the money, working with the brand to align on expectations that are going to be more reasonable. But in the grand scheme of things, that is what's really going to set you apart from all of the other creators out there that are willing to just completely overpromise on something that's never going to happen, because that's what brands are used to, right? They're used to creators just like overpromising on so many things, and then the video goes live and the creator's like, oh, well, guess it didn't work. Better luck next time. But when you can do something other than that, it sets you apart tremendously from all of the other creators out there that the brand could be working with. And it really just positions you in a much better light when it comes to building that long-term relationship.
100%. I think that leads into another topic that I'm always super fascinated by, but I know that you're an absolute expert in, is really understanding and utilizing human psychology and negotiation as part of that plan that you put together in the first place, and really crafting something that's that's really that's really advantageous in your way. I mean, how do you think about that when it comes to negotiation?
Oh my gosh, human psychology is fascinating, and this could be a whole nother episode. But here's kind of a quick example of how to use human psychology to your advantage in one very specific situation. Yesterday, was talking to a brand, and we pitched them a discounted package with 3 YouTube integrations for $30,000. Normally, this creator charges $12,500 for one integration, but we offer them this bundle of 3 for 30. The brand comes back and they say, we want to do just one integration for $10,000. And so they're still trying to get the discount, but they're not buying 3. So we can't give them a discount because they're not buying the package. What we want to do there is we want to figure out, well, why do they only want to do one? Did their boss tell them they can only buy one? Are they worried that if they try this and the first one doesn't go well, that, they're just going to be stuck in this deal that doesn't work and they have to do 2 more ads after they find out that it doesn't work? First step is just find out why they don't want to do it. And then once you've got that figured out, then it's like, okay, how do you present something else that they're going to be interested in to, again, take control, take the wheel, and bring this negotiation where you want it to go? One thing that a lot of our creators used to do in a situation like this is to just dig their heels in on what they already presented and say, no, your options are you can do 1 ad for 12.5, or you can do 3 ads for 30. And the brand already said no to both of those options. And so for them to go back on their no, change their mind, and then agree to do something that they already said they weren't going to do is incredibly difficult for any human being to do. We're so stubborn. And once we say no to something, in our minds, that option doesn't exist anymore. And if it does, there's so much friction that it takes, especially, if you're talking to somebody who's a proud person, right? And, everyone's been in this situation before where they feel proud and they don't want to go back on their word, right? It's like, oh, if I already said no to this and then I go back and say yes to it, then I'm coming across as weak, and this creator can just walk all over me, et cetera, et cetera. What we like to do in situations like that, where we're not going to give the brand one video for the discounted rate, is to kind of shuffle the existing options so that they feel new, even if they're not new. So for example, say the issue that this brand was facing was that their boss said, we don't want you to do 3 videos because we're afraid that the first one underperforms and then we're stuck in this deal that we can't get out of. Well, we could go back to the brand and we could say, hey, we can't do 1 video for 10, but we're happy to throw in a 30-day termination clause on that 3 video package to ensure that, if that situation does happen where the first one doesn't perform and you guys want to get out, that option is totally on the table. And at this point, you also want to set the expectation, like, we both want this to be successful. So hopefully we can talk about it a little bit before you guys just pull the trigger and leave. But, we can include that for you to help address this issue. And the thing is, for us, that could be a default, right? Like a 30-day termination clause could be something that we were already going to put in the contract, but because we present it in a way that it feels like a new option, it feels like we're giving them something else to make the 3 videos for 30 more enticing. That in their minds allows them to say yes to that while still feeling like they said no to that original offer that we put in front of them. It doesn't feel like they have to go back on their word because this feels like a new option, even though it might be the exact same thing that we presented to them earlier, just in a slightly different light. It feels like it's in a different font, but it's the exact same offer. So that's just one quick example of like how you can use human psychology to your advantage. But there's so many other, cognitive biases and other, ways of thinking that people are just prone to that you can really lean into and be thinking about when you're negotiating with a brand to make sure you're doing it as effectively as possible.
I guess that also puts into, puts things in a very positive light. Like, you're not backing anybody into a corner, like you said, that you need to admit that you were wrong and, hey, I'm happy to do this now. It's a really good out for somebody to say that, what, all right, let's do it. It's just reframed in a slightly different way, but it's about, the whole point is trying to get more people to say yes, or try to get more yeses than nos. And by framing things in a very different way through through human psychology is so clever And it's one of the most fascinating topics out there. There's so many ways that we can do about and think about things from a sales perspective in that way.
Yeah, because if it feels like you're just steamrolling a brand into the only options they have are the options that you want, and nothing they want matters, that's just not how you build a long-term relationship, right? That's just not how a brand is going to feel good about spending money with you and continuing to do so into the future. They're going to be like, man, this guy really just like held our feet to the fire and like didn't really give us any opportunity for our voice to be heard. Whereas, if you listen to them and you're just a little bit more intentional with how you're speaking, how you're presenting things, it's going to make the whole conversation feel entirely different, even if the outcome is the same for you and you get that 30K deal for 3 videos. How you get there is incredibly important because that's going to really dictate, how this relationship feels for everybody involved.
So the next mistake that I want to talk about, especially when it comes to negotiation, is the most common one, that oftentimes negotiations don't go your way and the deal doesn't get done. Now, the mistake isn't not getting the deal done. It's how you react and how you take it from that point forward. Now, remember that, just because a deal doesn't get done doesn't mean that the brand wants absolutely nothing to do with you. There could be so many different factors involved. There could be, marketing cuts, marketing budget cuts that happen. There could be, maybe this time, not this time, but next time instead. There could be so many different scenarios from the brand side of things as to why any particular deal didn't get done. Maybe they have, multiple buy-ins that they have to get from their boss or from their boss's boss that for whatever reason at this point in time just didn't line up. But the exciting part, the interesting part really about companies just generally, and especially in the marketing space, is that their budgets and how they set their budgets are so incredibly dynamic, meaning that they typically either reset every month or every quarter or every 6 months, or most certainly on a yearly basis, but most oftentimes far, far, far more frequently than that. So the point is, now why am I telling you this? It's important to always want to stay front and center with brands because budgets keep on resetting and opportunities will continuously come around, will continuously be around the corner, so that if you are in front of them and if you do stay top of mind, that is going to be your biggest win, because just because something didn't work out this time doesn't mean that it's not going to work out next month or next quarter from that side. So understanding, hey, when do your marketing budgets reset? When do you think we can have another conversation? Or even setting a date in the calendar to check in with them on a continuous basis. I typically set alarms, or I typically set, in my calendar, I'll say, hey, check in with brand every 2 months or every month or something of that nature if something doesn't go our way. And that is such a great way, again, to build relationships, to, understand, showcase curiosity, showcase that you care, and really put yourself in the best possible light to succeed the second time around.
It's so important to just be organized, right? Like keep some kind of record of who you're talking to, what brands you've talked to in the past, whether those deals have gone through or not, to make sure that you're staying top of mind with them. Because, if a brand spends money with you this month and then you completely forget about them for the next, 6 months, you probably left a decent amount of money on the table, right? Like if the deal went well, you should keep that line of communication open. And even if it didn't, you should keep the line of communication open so that they know that you care about them and that you're invested in this relationship. Likewise, if the deal didn't go through, keep track of, when was the last time I talked to them? What did we talk about? Where did we land off? Why did this not go through? When do their marketing budgets reset? Like when is a good time for us to reevaluate and reassess this conversation? All of that stuff, if you try to keep it all in your head, so much is going to fall through the cracks. And so it can be as simple to start off as just kind of having a little spreadsheet where it's like, what is the person's name? What company do they work for? What's their email? When's the last time we talked? Where did things end off? And just keep track of all that and refer back to it on ideally a daily, but even just a weekly basis is totally fine, so that you're constantly keeping up to date, you're staying top of mind with folks, and you're just making sure that nothing slips through the cracks. Now we're into the contracting stage. And this is an area that can intimidate a lot of creators. Contracts can be scary things, right? These can be documents written in legalese that are sometimes tens of pages long, much of which doesn't seem to make much sense and is extremely, extremely boring for a lot of creators to try to sift through and read. And so because of all that, there's a lot of mistakes that get made here that can be incredibly impactful, right? I've heard anecdotal stories of contracts that some of the biggest creators on the platform have signed, giving away their name, image, and likeness in perpetuity. It's crazy. You would absolutely know the names of some of these creators that have signed away incredibly important things very early on in their career that you can never take back. And so contracts are a extremely important area to be very thorough, very diligent with, because the consequences can potentially be, lifelong.
Geez, I haven't heard that one. Somebody signing away lifelong rights. That is incredible. But the point is very clear to what you're saying. Contracts are they are intimidating. The legalese that you mentioned is not for the faint of heart, but which is why it's even more important to make sure that you spend an adequate amount of time going through them. Not reading the contract, that's another mistake that creators make. So what are we talking about? What are some scenarios? What are some points that you should be looking out for? The first point that really matters the most, or one of the more important points at least, are you agreeing to exclusivity or not? Exclusivity is really the idea that you can only work with this particular brand or a pre-agreed set of brands ahead of time. A pre-agreed set of brands that have been defined ahead of time in this contract. It's really important that you spend a lot of time understanding and assessing whether or not this is reasonable or not. Most often we agree not, or we most often will not agree to exclusivity unless it's one particular brand that a creator really wants to work with. There may be certain scenarios where it's fine, maybe over a brief period of time. You can have exclusivity ranging anywhere from, say, a week after the campaign has gone live, or, some more strenuous ones could be months or even years, and or even in Apple's example there, a lifetime. So really understanding what exclusivity means, if that's on the table, and not glancing over that is super important.
Exclusivity can be very broadly defined or very narrowly defined. So, for instance, in some contracts, a company will by name list all of their competitors and say, you are not allowed to work with, these particular companies for this particular period of time. And that's the only kind of exclusivity that we can really get on board with, because the alternative is that they just give you a category and say, you can't work with any financial companies for a specified period of time. And that's incredibly broad, right? Financial can mean so many different things. It could mean banking, it could mean investing, it could mean a credit card, it could mean a mortgage or a loan, or, anything to do with money, could be categorized under financial. And so that kind of gives the brand the opportunity to kind of after the fact say, oh, no, you broke our exclusivity because you worked with this company, which we classify as a competitor. And so anytime that we are, allowing for exclusivity in a contract, it's incredibly important that all of the people that they consider to be competitors are listed by name so that there is no ambiguity on that front, because we absolutely do not want a situation where after the fact, a brand is saying, oh, you violated our contract because of XYZ company, which, happens to be one that we would classify as our competitor.
That brings up a really good point that generally for contracts, the more specific the terms of that contract can be, the better. The more defined it can be, the better. A finance company might be might mean very different for the brand as compared to what it might mean to you. If there's any ambiguity or any question marks as to what something means, it's probably not specific enough. Even that list of companies often goes through negotiation terms as well, where you say, hey, this company should not be in that list because of this reason, or this company we're okay with because, say, we don't think that there is a likelihood that we're going to be doing any deals with them in the first place, or for whatever other reason. But the more specific and granular and defined you can get in your contracts, the better, because you're going to be able to understand what exactly those outcomes or those potential future outcomes are going to be.
Everything in the contract is negotiable. It's not just the rate. It's not just the exclusivity or the usage rights or anything like that. Everything that you see in this contract is totally up for conversation. And some brands will have their non-negotiables, right? And you should have your non-negotiables as well. But it's very important to not be afraid to bring anything up when it comes to a contract if you're unsure about it. If you see something in there and you're not quite sure what it means, ask the brand to explain what they're going for, right? If the brand says we want to have the ability to edit your content, that's something that I'm always going to want to ask about. And typically we're never going to agree to, because we don't want to put our creators in a situation where a brand has the ability to, take that piece of content, cut it up however they want to, maybe construe the creator as to saying something that they weren't actually saying, and then run that as an ad, right? And so with anything that you see, it's important to just understand it and ask questions. Everything in the contract is absolutely up for conversation. And if there's anything in a contract that a brand is not willing to explain to you or help you understand why it's there, that's certainly a red flag.
That brings up another point that oftentimes, in fact, for most cases, the legal department is going to be very, very separate from the marketing department as well. And you're going to have lawyers that draft these contracts that will oftentimes focus on risk mitigation from a broad perspective, from a company-wide level, but that may not be the intention behind what the marketers want in this case as well. So to Apple's point, everything is negotiable. Everything is negotiable, or even everything is worth asking the question for what the intention behind that is, because oftentimes what we find is that maybe the intention might be very different from what the words say. And that's purely a function of, again, the lawyers sitting in very different offices from the marketer or the marketing department. And that's often fixable too. So it's worth keeping in mind that just because something is written in stone doesn't mean that it's very black or white. We can always have that conversation and really better understand why they're putting this in place and what they're really trying to achieve by doing it.
And that being said, it is really important as well to make sure that you not only read the contract, but understand all of the terms in it. And so, leveraging things like ChatGPT can be a good starting point, but really, having a lawyer in your corner, somebody that you can turn to send contracts to have them review them. In most cases, it might be a couple $100, but that can be well worth it in the grand scheme of things, especially when you think about, signing away things for life that could really, really come back to bite you. One word that it's extremely important to learn when it comes to looking at contracts is the word perpetual. If you Command F and find the word perpetual anywhere in that contract, you should absolutely know what you're agreeing to in perpetuity. In most cases, just shouldn't be in there at all. We pretty much do not agree to anything ever in perpetuity, because all of our contracts should be very specific. They should be very time bound. Everything in there should last for a specific duration. And there's very, very, very few instances where we want to grant brands the rights or the ability to do anything for all of time.
And that leads to who owns the content, what specifically is owned and by whom and by when. So whether we're talking about, specific, are we talking about usage rights? Are we talking about, ownership of a specific dedicated video that you've been hired for as, say, a paid actor? Or are we really talking about, does the brand have ownership over your content, which is a big, big red flag from our side. Never, ever should you be really giving ownership of your content to a brand unless there is some very, very, very specific reason where it might be acceptable. But understanding where ownership comes into play is also one of the biggest mistakes, or one of the biggest points that are worth highlighting, especially when it comes to contracts and really understanding properly what you're putting yourself into.
Right. Because if you do a 60-second integration for a brand and they own that content, at any point they can just say, oh, this video is infringing on our ownership. And likely they wouldn't do that. But if they own the rights to anything that you have made, it's theirs and you're borrowing it, right? And so you need to make sure that anything that you create is your work product, you own it fully. And if a brand's going to be using it for something, okay, you need to talk about that. You need to agree to the terms. How is it going to be used? Where is it going to be used? And that's all, that is literally usage. Like, that is what usage means. That's all well and good. But in terms of who actually owns the piece of work at the end of the day, that's got to be you, unless you're being hired for some kind of I don't know, UGC campaign or something like that, and you're a very small creator, in situations like that, sure, sometimes it can make sense for brands to hire you as a paid actor and for you to make a video for them and edit it and produce it and everything and send it to them. That's a whole different story. But if you are a large creator that has a very large brand, is reaching lots of people, ownership in virtually all cases should remain with you.
The final clause that I'd highlight here are termination clauses. So when you agree to a contract, one of the most important aspects is really to understand what are the exit clauses, or how can you get out of a contract, or how can the brand get out of a contract. The worst case scenario for creators, or the worst thing that you can read in a contract for creators, is what's called the termination for convenience. This means that the brand can, for whatever reason, cancel the contract at any time, and you may have produced the deliverable, you may have gone through great lengths to execute on what you'd all agreed on. If there is a termination for convenience, that means that you're unfortunately out of luck and they can cancel for whatever reason whatsoever. Instead, what makes more sense is to put different clauses under this termination clause. So meaning, hey, if, for instance, you as the creator take over a certain period of time to actually deliver on this, if there are some performance clauses in place that you and the brand agreed to, then that could be more applicable. But the worst thing that you can have in a contract is a termination for convenience, because that means that you can simply get canceled on for no reason whatsoever, or the contract rather can get canceled on for no reason whatsoever, and it would be fully enforceable by that contract.
So you want to make sure you know, how does this contract end? And with that also, what do the financials look like if a contract ends early? Because maybe you're looking at a one video deal and we get to the point where you're about to post the video. And like Eric said, there was termination for convenience. They kill the contract, and then it's written in such a way that you get paid nothing. And you've spent potentially days, weeks even, working on this particular ad creative, and you got paid nothing for it. So that's absolutely worst case scenario. Typically what you want to see is ideally some kind of, benchmark based approach where, once we get the script approved, then if the brand cancels, the payout is going to be a certain amount. And then once the video is approved, it's going to be a certain amount. And then once the video is posted, obviously that's the full amount of the contract. So that's going to be far more to a creator's benefit to have a structure like that in place. Or, if it's a long-term partnership too, and there's many different deliverables involved, you're going to want to know, like, if we cancel this thing partway through, what am I going to get paid? Right. And probably it should be proportionate to the amount of deliverables that you've posted. Like, that's probably a pretty reasonable way to approach it. If you've posted half of the content, you'd get paid half of the total amount. Those are very important questions to be asking and things to be looking for in these contracts to make sure that you're not putting yourself in a situation where you do virtually all of the work and get paid virtually none of the upside. When you're talking to a brand, like, you don't just want to rely fully on their word for what the contract actually says, because a couple of reasons. One, the marketing department and the legal department are often very separate. And if you're only talking to the marketing department, honestly, they just might not know what they're talking about. They might say things, or they might just, make stuff up because they kind of think they understand what the contract says. But you don't want to rely fully on their word for that reason. And then also, some brands, as great as they might seem to be, do slip things into contracts that really should not be there and were never discussed. Things like ownership, where they fully own the content. Things like perpetual usage rights. Things like exclusivity that was never discussed. And so as great of a person as you might be talking to on the other end, you never want to rely fully on their word. You always want to know what is written into this contract that you will be signing and you will be agreeing to, because you placing a signature on that contract is you acknowledging that you agree with every single word that has been written. If you're just going off of a couple of emails that you and this brand have exchanged and you're not reading through the 12-page contract that they sent you, but you're still signing it, that is not a position you want to be in, because there can be very substantial negative consequences from going ahead and just relying on what the brand tells you.
What are your non-negotiables? And what are they? Whether it's exclusivity, whether it's ownership, or whatever it might be, the most important thing that you can do, or the biggest mistake that we say is that we see is that creators will often not stand firm on their non-negotiables. And that's the most important part too, because you want to stand firm on what you agreed, what your plan was in the very beginning that you would most certainly not agree to, regardless of whatever the circumstances are. The implications of that could be significant. You know, if you go into something with a plan and then you walk out of there not having executed on that plan, again, the implications could be very, very severe from that. Understanding, you know, what types of usage you'd be okay with, or what types of ownership, if any, you'd be okay with, and really sticking firm on those points is really, really important.
Yeah, if you go into a negotiation and you just let a brand push you around and get whatever they want, and you're like, yeah, I guess I can do that. I guess I can do that. One, you're not standing true to like what you actually want and what you need from this engagement. And two, you're training the brand that they can just ask you for whatever they want and you'll give it to them. That creates a relationship that really just isn't going to last. You know, think about any relationship that you've ever been in. If the other person asks you for something and you say yes every single time, what happens? You know, eventually you don't want to be in that relationship anymore because you're just a punching bag. You're just getting pushed around and you've got no spine, and they know that they can get whatever they want out of you. And that's not the kind of relationship that you want to be in. And, you know, you could justify it by saying, oh, well, I'm just, you know, being really easygoing and easy to work with, et cetera. But at the end of the day, like, where does that lead? It leads to the brand just coming to the understanding that they can just ask you for whatever they want and you'll do it. And that's not really a relationship that anybody wants to be in. You don't want to come at these things from a scarcity mindset either, because, you know, if this is your biggest brand deal or it's this brand that you've always wanted to work with, it can be really easy to just like say, yeah, sure, I'll do whatever. But like we said earlier, it's a small industry. These brand reps move around, they talk. And so it's really not in your best interest to fold over for any brand, because it sets the precedent that you'll just do whatever anybody asks of you. And it's a slippery slope. And we've seen a lot of creators who approach brand deals from that scarcity mindset end up in a position they just really don't want to be in, where they end up doing bottom of the barrel deals for bottom of the barrel rates. And it just doesn't really lead them where they were hoping it would.
You know, one final point that we want to mention in different clauses, or in terms of clauses to look out for in contracts, and one that we do see creators making mistakes, is not also understanding what the payment terms are for the deals, especially for brands that you haven't worked with in the past. We can't stress enough that collecting half or even collecting any bit of money up front is really important, again, for any kind of risk mitigation, to ensure that if the brand doesn't live up to what expectations were in terms of dealing with them, you've been able to collect on at least a little bit of that capital. But, you know, more importantly, as it relates to contracts, is understanding, you know, what the payment terms are. Brands are always going to be incentivized to pay you as late as possible. Let me reiterate that. Brands are always going to be incentivized to pay you as late as possible. Therefore, it's going to be in your best interest to negotiate terms or even come up with means of understanding when those payment terms are going to be. If, for instance, you have a 60-day payment policy, you know, we've seen terms where brands will say, hey, it'll be 60 days after the end of the month that happens. And say you happen to post the video, or say you happen to execute on the deliverable in the early part of the month, you're going to have close to a 90-day payment term or payment deliverable, which happens. And that's a long time. And you have to be able to manage those kinds of delayed payments. So it's really important to understand, but not just understand, you know, if you can, negotiate those terms to be as favorable to you as possible. And, you know, oftentimes what leads to this from the brand's perspective is that they may say that, hey, we only do payroll once a month, therefore accounting can only handle this, you know, at this point in time. But most oftentimes, as with everything within the contract, these are negotiable. So what we tend to do for our contracts is we want to make sure that as often as possible, we will often put in, you know, 30 to 45 day payment terms at the latest, at the most. Only on very, very exceptional cases do we allow anything else outside of that. But understanding, again, going back to the previous point, that understanding what those payment terms are and when you will be getting paid for your execution is super important.
So now that you've got, you know, the contract signed, everything's been agreed to, you know exactly what everybody's going to be upholding. One area that a lot of creators neglect is what happens after. Okay. So fast forward, you've posted the content, you've gone through the review process. That's going to be a whole nother episode talking about, how do you best streamline those communications with brands? How do you provide them with the best content possible? But looking at after the fact, so the content's already gone live. At that point, best case scenario for most creators is that they remember to send an email to the brand afterwards, asking them how the video did. But more realistically, nothing. Most creators are doing nothing once a video goes out, except waiting around, twiddling their thumbs to see if the brand emails them again and wants to work with them again, which is just really leaving a lot of potential on the table, right? You're not effectively building a relationship with that brand. It feels very transactional when you do that, right? Because from the brand's perspective, they're like, oh, they got their money. Now they don't want to talk anymore. Guess we'll only be able to talk to them if we have more money for them. And that's not a good feeling, right? Think about any relationship. If the person's only talking to you because you're offering them money, that doesn't feel like a relationship that you probably want to be in. And so when you can effectively keep the conversation going after the fact, that's one of the key areas where you can start to turn this from a deal by deal, transaction by transaction relationship into a longer lasting partnership where you and this company can really work effectively together.
Oftentimes when deals don't go well, or the deliverables didn't live up to expectations, that's totally fine. If you lived up to all these different mistakes, or you've made sure not to make these mistakes, it'll be a very easy conversation to have. Is like, hey, so this one didn't really work out so well this time, but how do we go ahead and fix it? What were some of the things that you noticed that we can learn from it and take away from it, so that the next time we go about doing this, we can improve this and make it better. Having much more productive conversations like that is much better than hiding behind a curtain or hiding behind a screen and saying, hey, all right, well, that didn't really work. I guess I'll just move on to a different brand and not work with this brand again. It never works that way. That is really setting yourself up for failure. And that is, again, the worst case, or the worst thing that you can really do to set yourself up for any kind of success.
And if you're following all of these steps so far, right, you set a clear expectation and a clear goal at the beginning of this partnership. And now here's the time where you can refer back to that and see how you performed against that goal. And if you hit it, great, let's figure out why you hit it and what things we can double down on for the next partnership. If you didn't hit it, let's figure out why that happened. What were the things that happened that made it so that you did not hit that goal? Did not enough people click on the link? Maybe the ad wasn't compelling enough. Maybe the call to action wasn't compelling enough. Maybe there was something in the video. Maybe the brand's just not a great fit with your audience. Like, there's so many reasons why that could happen. Or, did you deliver the amount of clicks expected, but, not enough people converted? Let's see where they fell out of the funnel. Let's see if they didn't sign up. Let's see if they didn't take the next step. Where did we lose people? Or if it's an awareness campaign, maybe the video just hasn't really gotten pushed yet. And so it's just a matter of like setting that expectation with the brand of like, hey, looks like this video hasn't really hit the algorithm yet. It hasn't really hit my audience yet. Let's keep a close eye on it. I'm going to switch the thumbnail a couple of times. I'm going to switch the title a couple of times and see if we can really get it to catch, get that click-through rate up. But it's really just a matter of, diagnosing the problem. If there's a clear outcome that everyone was shooting for, you can diagnose the problem and figure out why that hypothesis didn't come true, and start taking steps to remedy that. Show them that you care, such that it's not just a conversation that looks like, oh, this one didn't work, you want to try again? It's like, no, this one's not quite hitting the goal yet. Let's try to tweak it and get those signs of life that would allow us to, justify doing something a little bit different, or doing something a little bit bigger, or incorporating another platform to try to increase the exposure here. There's so many different levers you can pull on. And when there's that clear objective that everybody's shooting for, it makes it so much easier to have those productive conversations when things don't go, best case scenario. So boiling this all down, it really comes back to a few core principles. The first of which is, being curious, asking lots of questions, and getting as much information as you can from the person that you're talking to about what they actually care about. From there, you want to think creatively about how you can help that person to achieve their goals, and how you can intentionally steer the conversation towards your goals that you personally have. And then on top of that, you can start to build a really strong relationship with this person when you show them that you care, you're willing to think creatively, you're willing to go the extra mile and do what it takes to help them to succeed in their role and build something that's going to be really exciting for everybody over the long term.
As a creator, you always want to be top of mind for a brand. So what does that mean? That means that, again, you build that relationship as if you were friends with them, almost in that way. You build a relationship that matters and, again, showcases curiosity but most importantly, you develop trust and you develop a sense of ownership for the product that you put out, but also you showcase that you live up to and you deliver what you promise, and you set expectations, you manage those expectations very well. It's really a very simple game when it comes down to it, but having a plan and having a process for how you go about each stage of the deal process in this case is really important. So hopefully this has been hopefully it's been eye-opening, and you can utilize this as a guide for as you go about negotiating deals and building relationships with brands going forward, and really turning those 1 deals into 10.
Exactly. Our whole goal here is to help move the industry forward, help make everybody better, and just broadly speaking, just help creators get paid what they're worth. And so sharing this information with you is our attempt at doing that. I hope you found it valuable, and we're really excited to catch you back here for the next one.